Welcome to the table, Congressman Warren Davidson, a Republican of Ohio, a member of the Financial Services Committee, also the Freedom Caucus. Let's begin with the coronavirus, and then we'll talk about FISA courts as well. The president has asked for $2.5 billion. The Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer of New York, are saying we need more like $8.5 billion. What do you think the number should be?
I think it's always easier to go with a low number and add more. You can't spend $2.5 billion before summer. I mean, and Congress is in session plenty of times between now and then. So I think it's rational to go with a lower number and spend more. But, you know, I think the president kind of signaled, sure, you want to give me more money? Give me more money. And I'm sure the president will make, judicious use of it. But frankly, let's be clear, we're borrowing the money. We don't have it.
What do you mean?
I mean, we're spending $1 trillion more than we have right now. Deficits actually do matter. And so you're going to borrow money. So it's like, well, why run up the full balance on the credit card when you could just pay for what you actually need right now?
What are you hearing from your constituents about their concerns with this coronavirus outbreak?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are concerned. In our district in Ohio, we have a lot of manufacturing, so people concerned about the supply chain. And, a lot of the timing on this hit right as Chinese New Year was going in China. A lot of the supply chain still goes back to China. And, tons of people didn't come back to work. So you're going to see disruptions in the supply chain. So it's not just a supply shock, it's also a demand shock because people are checking up on, their public activities in other parts of the world. And so what is going to be the spillover effect in the U.S.?
What kind of companies are in your district that are connected, the supply chain's connected to China's?
Well, we have a lot of automotive, aerospace. I mean, Procter & Gamble's in the area, GE engines, aircraft engines are in the area. So some of the big companies that you would recognize are there, but a lot of the downstream supply chains for, say, the Honda supply chain, Toyota supply chain, GM, and then any number of things in the aerospace. We just had NASA NASA Director Jim Bridenstine out in northern Kentucky talking to the supply chain for space, everything from the Earth up and UAVs and how that's possibly going to transform all the way up into deep space. So strong supply chain there. And of course, ag presence, this isn't the same kind of thing where they're used to accommodating with bird flu or things like that in the past. So there's a good amount of readiness in the area, in the healthcare area, but people are paying attention to it.
Have those companies told you they've already been hurt by this?
No, just kind of a early warning system. And frankly, supply chains have been made more resilient because, as everyone knows, President Trump has made dealing with trade a huge priority for his administration. And frankly, our supply chains are more resilient because we've had this ongoing trade issue with China. So companies have started shifting. I talked with a company who said, yeah, we were getting all of our forgings and castings from China. And we decided we needed to dual source that and now have actually 3 sources. And so they have a much more resilient supply chain to deal with shocks like this.
Could your farmers see an uptick in exports of their products to China because the Chinese, can't rely on their own production of whether it be, I don't know what's in your district, but whether it's wheat or flour or hogs, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. So we have big corn and soybeans, but we also have like one of the larger poultry districts in the country. And when you look at pork, for example, China's #1 source of protein is pork. And they had a huge outbreak of disease with their swine population this year. So it did help exports, although the trade dispute, China didn't want to concede as much. Could have helped more, and we look forward to seeing the progress the administration is making on the trade negotiations so that it will get our ag sector back strong with the export market.
And what have you heard from healthcare providers in your district and hospitals? Are they prepared?
I think they're, trying to make sure that they are. So they're trying to learn everything that they can from HHS. They're pushing the information out. CDC has been responsive. And so I spoke with someone who had said, yeah, we talked to CDC. We didn't know exactly how to treat the person. And it was really relaying secondhand, not something that happened in our district, but, kind of what is the protocol? And so they get somebody that shows symptomatic, and one of the things that's going in now is test kits, and you already covered that in the previous segment. But just making sure that when someone does show symptoms, that they have a way to get a rapid feedback on the test.
The other issue that we wanted to talk to you this morning about is these expiring FISA provisions. Could you explain what they are for our viewers?
Yeah, so FISA is Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It really was passed in 1978, but massively expanded under the Patriot Act. So a lot of people will think of these provisions as Patriot Act provisions. And so Section 215 is the business records provision. So the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is intended to target foreigners, but a lot of Americans' data, the controversial part, particularly post Edward Snowden, was how many Americans' private records were being collected and searched, frankly, without even having a warrant, and the standard for the warrant. And so you've seen systematic abuse of this. So October 8th of 2019, the FISA court made public a 2018 opinion where they found, abuses kind of across the range from the intelligence agencies and the FBI. And of course, they're not supposed to do that. It's against the law. They've come to Congress and said that none of this was happening, but now we know that that wasn't true. And so, and not to mention all the things with Horowitz and Mueller investigation and President Trump. And so even the biggest fans of the Patriot Act are looking at this in a different way. So yesterday there was supposed to be a markup of reauthorization, and Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler pulled the bill that he was planning to move forward because there was a coalition of conservatives and progressives that were backing a bill. Zoe Lofgren and I, Democrat progressive from California, had Safeguarding Americans Private Records Act that would have required an amicus with full access to all the classified data to advocate on behalf of American citizens, and a number of other reforms that safeguard Americans' private records, the SAPRA. So going into that, it was possible that we would be marking up our bill instead of the bill the chairman wanted, and then a number of amendments that if that didn't pass, that a number of the amendments would have surely passed. And so it was checked up. And so now we're just trying to make sure that we actually get a real hearing on FISA and the reforms that a bipartisan coalition and bicameral, frankly, Senator Dane and Senator Wyden are sponsors in the Senate side of the same bill. So a good coalition saying we have to reform the system in light of all the abuses that we've seen. And frankly, it rehashes a lot of the debate that did occur at the time of the Patriot Act.
Let me go over for our viewers the other surveillance programs that are set to expire. Authorization of roving wiretaps, authority over lone wolf surveillance, and this is according to the Hill newspaper. Now, the Safeguarding Americans Private Records Act, which you and Zoe Lofgren are introducing, it would reform Section 215 of the Patriot Act, addresses problems identified by the Inspector General, and expands oversight and transparency and closes secret law loopholes. Can you dig a little bit more into what you're talking about here?
Yeah, so it would also reauthorize roving wiretaps, and then because that's delayed, we're actually reintroducing a bill that just reauthorizes roving wiretaps in the case we can't move forward with the 215 reauth or anything else. When you talk down into the business records, for example, let's take the lone wolf, for example. The lone wolf, under testimony, they've said they've never used it. And so, what collection would you do on a lone wolf that has no coordination with anyone, right? So that's why they've never used it. So in theory, you could have a lone actor that's going to come do some harm in America, but if they were completely lone, and who would they be coordinating with, right? So under oath, they've said they never have used that provision. Now you go to like the call records, for example, and they've said that they're no longer doing the call tracking program. They said that they had spent about $100 million tracking American citizens' phone calls and searching through it, and in all the time they've done it, they've only had one case that resulted in a prosecution off of it. So it's really an assessment of the effectiveness of the protocols that they put in place. On the other hand, there are things like your emails that you might have. In some cases, just because the server happens to be located out of the United States, people don't even know. They may not even be in direct connection with a foreign power. So the standard originally was that if you're going to use FISA instead of a traditional warrant process and target an American citizen, that you had to get a warrant. And the only way you could do it warrantlessly through the FISA court was if you had a connection to 4 criteria that I can't say the exact 4 criteria off the top of my head, but 4 criteria that were a bright line test. Now, post I think 2015 reforms under the USA Freedom Act, it made it so it just has a slightest nexus to any part of a crime. So it wasn't the core piece of why you were looking for it. It's just tangentially, oh, they might have actually talked to a foreigner. Let's check this.
Congressman Warren Davidson, serving his second term, represents Ohio's 8th District. Here to take your questions on this. Republicans 202-748-8001, Democrats 202-748-8000, and Independents 202-748-8002. We'll go to David first, Middletown, Ohio. Republican.
Hello, Greta.
Morning.
Hey, Warren Davidson's my congressman, and I appreciate everything he's doing. I appreciate Donald Trump taking on the coronavirus. I mean, it gets so much,
Criticism?
It's great to talk with you, David. How are you today?
I'm better than I deserve.
Amen.
All right. Well, do you share his concern that the president's getting criticized for this unfairly?
Well, I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, right? You look at the president, he's been criticized. You go back under George W. Bush, he was criticized by the media. You go back to, the history of it. They're horrible until they're not. President Trump was loved by everyone, and then he became president. And so we'll see where it goes afterwards. But in the meantime, yeah, I mean, that's what they do. They criticize the president. First it was he was overreacting and being xenophobic by blocking people at the airports coming directly from China who weren't American citizens. And then it's, oh, you're not doing enough. You can't do enough. So is it too much, too hot, too cold? It's every day is a day to criticize the president for some people.
Joe in Maine, independent.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Before I say anything, you're making $174,000 to sit here and lie to the American people. The reason I criticize Donald Trump is 16,000 lies. Okay? He's sitting there last night saying, don't worry about nothing. You heard him. Don't worry about nothing. Contradicting all the experts that are standing behind him. Come on. Wake up. You're on the Financial Committee. You just said we don't need to put more money there or here. We're $22 trillion in debt because of a tax break for white men only. You sat on a jury, you took an oath, and you didn't do anything to go after the Mueller report. You ignored that. 10 obstructions of justice. Not from me. Not from me.
Well, God bless America. Thank God we have free speech, and appreciate your opinion. We obviously don't agree on much, but thanks for sharing it.
Middleton, who's in Ona, West Virginia, Democratic caller.
Okay, Mr. Representative, I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Did you watch the press conference that the president gave, or watch the clip that Greta showed when the CDC chief was talking, and Trump standing behind them, looking at his body language and his face expressions? What does that tell you? Does that tell you that he really cares? Just look at him. He wants him to hurry up and shut up. That's the way you see it. That's the way I see it.
Well,
I've seen the clip.
I
apparently
didn't see the same clip that you're referencing, because I didn't get that from the president at all, and I don't think anyone in Congress has a sense of that the president doesn't care. So, he's at a press conference. I think he's looking at a shared stage, and, frankly, the president doesn't share the stage a lot. So, it could just be that. They're showing a clip here in the audience, so he's looking. I'm looking at part of that clip right now, and so yeah, I could see what you're talking about. He's definitely seems ready for his chance to come back and say something at the mic. And I think the one of the things that the people look to the president of the United States to do is to be a steady voice in a time of stress for the country. And when you look back at how well the United States has responded to past crises, if you look at SARS, Ebola threat under President Obama, the bird flu, any number of things, our system in the United States, beginning with security at the border, beginning with the Centers for Disease Control, National Institutes for Health, and frankly our massive private sector that is incredibly innovative, look at the response that we've had in the track record we've had. So I don't think the president's saying, hey, this isn't anything to worry about for anyone in the world. I think he's saying for the people in the United States, look, we are taking this seriously and we have the resources to deal with the problem. And I think when people come on and they sound alarmist, the president's like, no, you're going against the message. The message here is, we've got this. Make sure you take your precautions, wash your hands, practice good hygiene. If you are sick, stay home and don't get other people sick. But otherwise, go to work and get back to normal life. Things are going to be fine. And I think that was the message, not that he didn't care. But when you see somebody say something that's at odds with that, he's like, well, let's weigh back in and get the focus from the right topic here.
Norfolk, Virginia. Regina, Independent.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for taking my call. I want to ask the representative exactly why the president did not use a FISA warrant to go after the Biden son. I don't care what anybody thinks. FISA is there for the protection of the individual citizen from abusive government and intrusive government. It worked for Carter Page, and why wasn't he held to the same standard?
Well, I think the president's been clear that he believes the standard that was used to target him was wrong, and it was an abuse of law. It was an abuse of the power that people who were trusted to do the right thing abused that trust and targeted him and others. And so you also see it, for example, when Bernie Sanders was warned that Russia was intervening in a way that would benefit Bernie Sanders. You know, I thought the protocol was you were supposed to begin a spying campaign on Bernie Sanders and all of his network, right? I mean, so the president has said, and he's consistent, I don't believe that's the right thing. That shouldn't happen to any presidential candidate, and it shouldn't happen to any American citizen. And so I do believe that the president is going to be opposed to moving forward with a reauthorization of FISA with no reforms. And the reforms, I think, are going to have to be meaningful, not just for candidates or high elected officials, but for all Americans to make sure that their privacy is respected and we follow the Constitution.
Norfolk, Ohio. We'll go there next, where James is watching, a Democratic caller.
Yes, I have a question for the congressman. Did you vote for or against the right to organize, the labor union bill?
I don't know which vote you're speaking about. So, but if you're talking about, do I support right to work in states, for example, and there was a recent effort to nationalize opposition to right to work, I believe states can have those laws, and I don't think the federal government should say we're going to undo what states have done who've passed right to work laws, if that's the reference.
Okay, do you believe that right to work lower wages or unions raise? Is it better to have a union household or a non-union household?
Well, in my family, we've got both. My grandpa, or papa as I call him, he's a retired Teamster. My father-in-law is a retired Teamster. He's got a great pension. He ended up with lower wages for a lot of his career because he put a lot into the pension fund. And right now there's a lot of concern because Central State's pension fund and some of the mine workers' pension funds, I've got an uncle who's a retired mine worker caught up in underfunded pensions there. On the other side, you know, I've got family who have worked and saved for their retirement, and they've had a different system because they kept more take-home pay all through the system, and it wasn't going into the pension fund. So I think both can be good, and you know, even in a union situation, you can have bad outcomes because the pension fund can be underfunded.
Mary Ellen in Sarasota, Florida, Independent. You're on the air with Congressman Warren Davidson.
I'd like to ask how the Democrats that are complaining about the president's response to coronavirus can justify the biggest threat and risk of a vector from illegal foreign nationals coming into our country who are not investigated, are not regulated. That's where disease transmission can really take hold. Italy is bottlenecked. The EU has ignored Italy's cries for help. They have massive amounts of illegal foreign nationals that have migrated into Italy, and they're stuck there because the EU will not let them. They haven't helped Italy. We have the same risk at our southern border, and I'd like to know how the Democrats can complain when they truly are responsible for unregulated entry into this country.
Yeah, I think it's a fair concern. You know, the president said, well, if you don't have a secure border, you don't really have a secure country. And I think that's true. When you look at the response at the border, the way that we're able to screen people who are coming in on flights, we can know where they were before, their connection, and we have a very good system of people when they come through border checkpoints of being able to say, and we can check and assess at the border even, are they symptomatic at a very superficial level. But when you go across the border in an unsecure way, obviously there aren't safeguards there. So we do need a secure border, and I think this is just one of the, a plethora, an abundance of ways that highlights why having a secure border matters. And it can be a very important safeguard, just like the president's decision on blocking anyone coming directly to China who's not an American citizen for this time period. It was an effective safeguard, even though initially a lot of people said it was alarmist and xenophobic. And so I think, you look at how can you do that? Well, you can't do it if you don't have border security.
Kirksville, Missouri. We'll go there next. Democratic caller, Danny.
Yeah, I was calling about why are you so partisan in Congress? Ever since Newt Gingrich and the contract with America after Clinton, you've been at odds with the Democrats on almost everything, and you keep saying you're justified, and you say the others can't be justified. You don't have any kind of reason to respect them and stuff. You keep saying they're at the other problem, and you don't care what anybody else thinks. I mean, you got to care about somebody that ain't Republican, Yeah,
that's a fair concern, partisanship. And frankly, when you look at the timing of this, cable news kind of came into being in the same kind of time frame, right? And so you see this 24/7 news cycle coverage, and frankly, apparently what sells ads is conflict and division. The reality is there are a lot of things that, even on the most partisan topics like healthcare, Republicans and Democrats agree. And I'll highlight one of those. But the other part is when you look at Gingrich, why do people so much associate that with Gingrich? Well, for 40 years prior to that, Republicans were in the minority in the House. So Democrats had a majority in the House of Representatives for 40 years. So the whole thing was pretty partisan and one-sided until the Gingrich contract with America produced a Republican majority. And there has been some back and forth since then. So now in the consciousness of people, there's a difference between the parties. And just one thing to highlight that I love emphasizing, health insurance companies are exempt from antitrust laws that would prohibit price signaling, market shaping, like, hey, you're staying out of this county and we're going into that one, efforts to block new entrants. Antitrust laws are a big deal about making markets work, actually keeping capitalism functioning correctly. But health insurance companies are exempt from this. So in 2017, in the height of controversy on reforming health care, Republicans and Democrats voted on this. It was H.R. 372 in March of 2017, and it passed 416 to 7. It wasn't even close. And I thought, as a new person, new member of Congress, that this would be huge national news. Everyone would be talking about it. And the reality is there was almost no mention. There was a little tiny blip buried at the New York Times and a little tiny blip buried in the Hill. There was no national TV coverage. There was nothing else about it. And people speculate, why is that? And I spoke to a longtime member, and he said, well, they don't bring this up in the news, and they're not going to bring it up in the Senate. Probably because it would pass. Why? Because some people don't actually want it to pass. And there's no emphasis on the things we do agree on. Even in May this year on health care again, Congress voted 420 to 0 to make it easier to launch generic drugs in the House. It still hasn't got a vote in the Senate, and you see almost no mention of it in the press. And you have to ask yourself, why is that?
Bob in Victoria, Texas, a Republican.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Representative. My God, back up our man, because I tell you what, he ought to throw this back in the Democrats' face, tear the walls down, just let them come on in here with the viruses and everything else. Look at California, it's a cesspool. And all these illegals, how many of them are working in kitchens in New York and Illinois and Texas with some kind of disease, and tell them about the restriction on flying people over here. Oh, that was all bad. Now they're hollering, oh, we're going to die. We got to put more money into it. you know, this is ridiculous. The Democrats have come home to roost, and it's not looking good for them. And they need to be exposed. He needs to tell them about this catch and release. If they got a fever, just release them on into the country. Yeah, next time you eat a salad.
Go ahead, Congressman.
Yeah, I just look at the consequences of that, and while I get that presumably you're speaking hyperbole and you're looking at the irony of the situation, that would be a horrible thing to do. And frankly, even if the president wanted to do that, Congress would never go along with it.
But there's no evidence that's happening.
This president loves our country, and that's not going to happen. And I think you look at the concern, if you look at where are people with the disease and why it's so important, public health is important. Go back to early issues in the United States of America with Typhoid Mary and how we had to quarantine her. She was a carrier but was asymptomatic. And look at how far public health has come in the United States of America since that time. I mean, we truly lead the world in our response. And, some people say, oh, well, but Singapore. I mean, you're talking about a little city-state. I mean, this is a nation of 330 million people with massive borders, the world's biggest economy, the world's most diverse population, people coming here from all over the world. And yet our system has worked very effectively, so far. And part of why it works so far is we don't take for granted that it's going to work this time. So you see the president making a big deal about it, and frankly, you see Congress making a big deal about it. It is going to be taken seriously, and we are confident that we have made the investments that give the United States of America the ability to deal with threats like this.
How much are your state and local officials spending in your district or in your state on preparing for the coronavirus?
Yeah, that's a question I don't know in terms of response, and frankly, it hasn't reached that level. I mean, you look at what are we spending money on? What is massively bigger than fatalities even worldwide from coronavirus? Opioid fatalities. I mean, you're talking, less than 3,000 worldwide fatalities from coronavirus, and granted, it's early into it, but it isn't even close to the number of fatalities in the United States of America from opioids. So Ohio is definitely geared up for that. It's ground zero for the opioid crisis and fatal overdoses. And frankly, the trend is down by about 20%, but it's still far too many people dying because of drugs.
In your district as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you're familiar with Hillbilly Elegy, is a best-selling book. J.D. Vance wrote it. He's from Middletown, Ohio, and kind of highlighted some of the nature of things that have gone on there. What I hope he does is writes a sequel about how great things are right now. And there are a lot of really good trends, which are, last year at the State of the Union, I brought the Middletown police chief out, and we highlighted the great success they're having, not just dealing with opioids, but with community policing, getting the whole community involved, and really dealing with the broad array of things that are pushing people to use the drugs in the first place.
One last call for you. Steve in Cincinnati, Ohio, independent.
Thanks for all you do, Representative.
Thank you.
I just got, if you know about it, there has been Dr. Francis Boyle, who wrote the bio-laws in the 80s, helped legislate bio-laws, has come out with an article pointing out 5 years ago that North Carolina University, along with the Institute of the Military, has sold China something that looks similar to the coronavirus. Now, could you comment on that, or please go find out? And another thing is, please get rid of all the surveillance on American people. It has done nothing, and it never will. It's just for surveilling the people. Thank you, and thanks for all you do.
Thanks for your comments. And you look at the exports to China, one of the big laws that did get passed was a reform to export controls to China, but also Chinese investment into the United States. So there's a committee on foreign investment in the United States. There was a lot of concern that in recent prosecution, or at least charges filed against some professors in Massachusetts who were cooperating to build biological facilities in China using sensitive American technology. And so these technology transfers are getting attention at the highest levels, down to the doctoral and postdoctoral students that are developing the intellectual property, down to the buildings that the owners are buying and in some cases using the whole IT infrastructure to pull, private, confidential, sometimes classified, and certainly sometimes patented or patent pending, very early stage technology. And China's been behind a lot of that. So the United States is definitely paying a lot of attention to it.
Congressman Warren Davidson, thank you, sir, for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Come back again.
Thank you.
We're going to take, coming up next, we're going to return to our question that we asked all of you earlier, respond to the news conference the president held yesterday defending the U.S. response to the coronavirus. We want to get your thoughts on it. There are the phone numbers on your screen. Yesterday, he was joined by the top officials responsible for preparing our country to the coronavirus. One of them was the Center for Disease Control's Ann Schuchat. And here's what she had to say about what the public should know about the virus.